All righty. I want to thank everybody that's going to be here tonight, and everybody's already here. Thank you for this. I appreciate your study. We're continuing the book of Zechariah tonight, and we're going to pick up with chapter 6, and we'll go on from there. Again, out of all the minor prophets that we look at, we know that this is probably the longest, 14 chapters, as opposed to just 2 or 3 chapters. There's a couple of them was Habakkuk and so forth. So let's always keep in mind that the length of the book and all does make a little bit of difference, how long it's going to take us to get through it. I hope that I'm challenging you, and I know for a fact that you're challenging me, and I do appreciate you so much. Before we go any further, let's pray. We're grateful, Father, for this day, and we're grateful for your love, and we're grateful for your patience that we cannot even begin to imagine. Father, I don't understand sometimes whenever I look at the world and see where we're going, and there's a lot of angst and a lot of fear, Father, and Father, we know we need to trust you. I look at this, Father, and compare this with what we're reading about what was going on in the Old Testament, and I see so many similarities. Father, I pray that you would help us to realize that as long as you're in charge, that's all that matters. I thank you, Lord, for Jim and Tina. I thank you for Jerry. I thank you, Lord, for Mike Bisson and all the students that are taking various classes at the Georgia School of Preaching. I pray, Father, for them. I'm grateful, Father, that we could talk to you and we could truly just trust you and know that no matter what, it's going to be okay because you have this. Strengthen us, Father. From these prophets, strengthen us. And help us keep on plugging away when it seems like the world is just destined to go the wrong way. Help us to learn from them. Give us the courage to speak boldly. Help us to honor you above all. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, quickly going over chapter 1 and through following. We remember the first thing he does, chapter 1 through 6, is the idea of returning, trying to get everybody to come back to the Lord, and especially to go back and rebuild the temple. This was about 520 BC. Then we have, beginning in chapter 1, verse 7, and going through the next, all the way through chapter 6, the idea of the next visions that he emphasizes here. There was the vision of the horsemen that began 5 months after the work began on the temple. And Haggai chapter 1 verse 15 emphasizes that. Talks about the different kinds of horses that was going on and how each one of them represented something. And we did try to spend a little bit of time talking about how these were things that had been prophesied about in other situations. Jeremiah chapter 25, 11 and 12, and 29:10. We understand as we're looking through all of this, it's the ideal of trying to rebuild the temple and all that's going on there. In chapter 2, verse 1, it's a vision of a man with a measuring line. It's a new vision. And again, whenever you see somebody coming with a measuring line, it seems like that he's trying to measure and see how everything is living up to whatever God it is that want, or what is God that want. It could very well be measuring the walls of the city of Jerusalem for the future size of the city. He could be as well working with rebuilding the temple along that line. And it's a new vision. The ideal is that I want my people to come back here and I will dwell in your midst. That's the key there. In chapter 2, verse 9, 10, and 11, he says, I will dwell in your midst, declare the Lord, and many nations shall join themselves to the Lord in that day and shall be my people. And we emphasize the idea that God's covenant relationship is not just with the Jews, but with all nations. Chapter 3, he talks about Joshua, the high priest, standing before the angel of the Lord and clothed with filthy garments, and how Joshua was given new garments to wear, because these were beginning to emphasize the idea that things were going to change, and they now need to make sure that they're doing exactly what God wants them to do, coming before God with clean clothes and doing the things that needs to be done. And he emphasizes in verse 7 of chapter 3, he said, if you walk in all my ways and keep my charge, you shall rule my house and have charge of my courts. And again, here was the high priest that should be setting the example. And a lot of times at those times, we think about leadership. We think about how important leadership is. We think about how important it is that we set the example. He then talks about the vision of the lampstand in chapter 4, the entire chapter 4 always emphasizes that whole idea. And he says, one passage that we're very familiar with, he's saying to Zerubbabel, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord. And so he's now in that respect. And he says, the hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of this house, obviously the temple. And he says, they've got work to do in trying to rebuild that temple. Then the vision of the flying scroll in chapter 5. And as you look at that, he's measuring this. He sees the scroll 20 cubits by 10 cubits. And this is the curse that goes out over the face of the whole land. So everybody that is not living up to God's commands are still going to be punished. He talks about false swearing, talks about stealings, talked about swearing by God's name. Chapter 5, the vision of the woman in the basket. And what's he doing? He's carrying this woman off, and this is their iniquity in all the land. And they call this woman wickedness. And he's thrust her into the basket, and the two women come forward with wind in their wings. Again, it sounds like angelic beings of some sort. And then we go into that idea of where he's emphasizing that take her to the land of Shinar, get this sin away from here so that we don't have this repeat all over again. And then chapter 6, this is where we come down to it. We see about, well, let me just count them again. We see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and chapter 6 starts with the 7th vision. Then after that, there's no more visions. It seems like he now begins to talk about the crown, the temple, beginning in chapter 6 at verse 9. So I lift up my eyes, 4 chariots come out between the mountains. The first one, red horses, black horses, white horses. The 4th chariot, dappled horses, all of them strong. What are these? He says, these are, he said to the angel who's talked with me, what are these, my Lord? So again, here you have angelic beings giving him this message from God. These are going out to the 4 winds of the heaven. And again, all these are going north, south, east, and west. And they're ready to patrol the earth. And we emphasize the idea that chariots were, one commentator said chariots were the ancient version of tanks in our military today. So just try to keep that in mind. When you see all these things, every one of them going out to these various places, it's like God is taking the battle to them, as opposed to what was going on at that time, whether they're giving it up. The idea of the color of the horses also represents some things. The red horse suggests blood. It suggests persecution. The black would suggest, the black horses would suggest grief and famine. The white always represented what? The conqueror, right? We see this symbolism as well in Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. The black horses were mentioned in Revelation chapter 6, 5, and 6. And then again, the red horses are mentioned in Revelation chapter 6, verses 3 through 4. So it's extremely interesting that John the Revelator is using, by inspiration, many of the same figures that the Jews would be very familiar with in studying the book of Zechariah. So all of these things are just kind of a reminder that history repeats itself. God is always going to be judging his people. God is going to be standing up for and doing what he can for his people in every way that he can. And so the thing is that they're all on missions. He said they're going out to the 4 winds of the heaven. The chariot with the black horses go toward the north. The whites go after them. The dappled one goes toward the south. And they're all impatient, ready to go. Some people see here, there's possibly, this might suggest, and again, because this is so apocalyptic, you might say, and because this signs and the visions that we're seeing here, I think that it's talking about, obviously it's something of judgment of famine, judgment of pestilence, and all this. And some of them see that with these 4 different types of horses, the white, the black, the 4th, all of these might represent the idea of the 4 winds, obviously, but also 4 kingdoms. But I don't know that this really represents 4 separate kingdoms as much as it's representing these beings that he sees, where God is sending out every which way to take care of what needs to be taken care of. Jeremiah mentioned the idea of the scattering winds, going in the scattering winds in Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 36. And the destroying wind of Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 1, where he's talking about Babylon coming in as a wind and just blowing everything down. So this is something that they could understand as well. So here we have these different visions, and the book starts off that way. And a lot of times that's where a lot of people struggle, and they don't spend enough time maybe going into the book itself. Maybe they don't have the background to help them understand where is this coming from. I think, as I said, this is part of the reason why we need to study more of the Old Testament and the figures and the visions and everything else there at that time. At the same time, we've got to be very, very, very careful of not specifically trying to find something in our day and age to make it fit to the Bible back then. And that's where, again, a lot of premillennial theory comes in. That's why a lot of times Zechariah, Daniel, especially Revelation, that's why these books are used all the time to emphasize these specific teachings as premillennialism. And that's the reason why I think, as teachers, as students, we need to know even that much more about the Old Testament passages here, so that we can say, okay, this is what was going on at that time. Here's the context of what's happening. Here's how God does it. It may very well be that John did the same thing, using the same figures, the same ideas. But look, it's a whole totally different situation from Zechariah's day to over here at the end of the New Testament. And so let's not be so dogmatic about, or as a lot of these people are, of trying to find a definite meaning to a specific figure and then making it say something the Bible never, ever taught. I think that's something that we have to deal with a lot when it comes to premillennialism. All right. So now we get down to chapter 6, verse 9, and he says, you take the exiles, Heldai, Dobijah, and Jediah, and set the crowns on their head, set it on the head of Joshua. He's the high priest. And I think we did emphasize the idea here. And he says, and I think this is where we really keyed in on in the last part of it, was the idea, thus says the Lord, the man whose name is the branch. He shall branch out from his place, and he shall build the temple of the Lord. So he's going to make 5 different statements about the branch here that I think is very important, that helps us to understand the ideal of the church. Now, in Jeremiah 33:15, again, Jeremiah uses that same figure of the branch, okay? And as we look at this, we see that this branch, the man whose name is the branch, he shall branch out from his place, and he shall build the temple of the Lord, and he who shall build the temple of the Lord shall bear royal honor. So here is the idea, and I think we may have referenced it very quickly last week, but the idea that this branch has reference to Jesus. He's emphasizing the temple of the Lord. He is not just a priest, but also serving as a king, the boy bearing the royal honor. He sits and rule on his throne, and there shall be a priest on his throne, and the council of peace shall be between them both. So here you have the idea that there's a priest, but there's also Jesus sitting on the throne. So as we're looking at this, what are some things that we need to see? Number 1, Jesus being the branch here, he shall grow up out of his place. He's going to be, as found in another passage of scripture, Isaiah 53:2, a root out of a dry ground. A root out of a dry ground. He's also going to be of the house of David. We know that. It's because, again, that royal honor, there's that idea. And so, again, you have the idea that the house of David, Amos chapter 9, verse 11, by the time Amos was writing, the house of David had gone into decay, but we remember that Jesus come from the lineage of David, and that's what causes him to be able to rule as king. Secondly, he shall build the temple of God. All right. Now, the first point is he shall grow up out of his place. And again, he's going to be that root out of dry ground. Secondly, he shall build the temple of God. Now, what is the temple of God today? The church. You're right, brother. That's exactly the answer there. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 5, Peter calls the church a holy temple. Now, isn't it interesting how much the Jews attached to that idea in the Old Testament, and how Peter, by inspiration, was bringing it into the New Testament, bringing that same idea. And it's a holy temple, not just because it's the church, but it's also, the emphasis is a habitation of the Spirit. So the Spirit dwells in us. And that's a whole nother study for a long time, right? How does he dwell in us? Having grown up in a Pentecostal background, I shared with you before, that's something that I struggled a lot with. Number 3, he shall bear the glory. He's laden with honor, majesty, and power. 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 12. He's also, somebody say something? Okay. He's also a priest upon his throne, after the order of Melchizedek. Genesis 14, verse 18. And so you see this in Acts chapter 2, verse 29 through 31, Hebrews chapter 1, 3 and 13, 1 Corinthians 15, verse 25 and 26. And so he talks about the council of peace. We remember Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 and 7, and Micah chapter 5 at verse 14. And so notice he says, he sent me to you, and it shall come to pass if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God. One of the things I also noticed, and I hope that I've pointed it out as we've gone through this, is how God emphasizes over and over again the importance of being obedient to what God says. It's so vitally important. It's so vitally important. All right, so we pick up chapter 7 and verse 1 all the way through the 8th chapter, verse 23. And here he's talking about from fast to feast. In the 4th year of Darius, now Darius is a king over Persia. That's right. Do what, brother?
I said Medes, but maybe Persia is more accurate.
Medes and Persians, yeah. We kind of combine them together. And it seems like that the Medes were helping the Persians, but the Persians do wind up taking the ascendancy even above the Medes. But they're in this coalition. So you're exactly right there, brother. That's right. All right. It's the month of Chislev, which is the 4th day of the 9th month. Chislev was about, interestingly enough, the month of Chislev in the Jewish calendar is right along the ideal of November, December, about where we are right now. This is where it begins and goes through the time. So I found that extremely interesting as I was studying through this. Now, the people, the Bible says in chapter 7, verse 2, of Bethel had sent Sharezer, and Regem-Melech, and their men to entreat the favor of the Lord. So they're there, they're working on the temple, they're trying to do what God wanted and what God expects, and they are asking for God's blessing. Think about the idea, and they start asking this question: should we keep weeping and abstaining in the 5th month as we have done for so many years? Now, for 70 years, they would always fast during the 5th month, because that would remind them of the destruction of the temple, the destruction of Israel, and being taken into captivity. 70 years, right around the same time frame, they would fast and abstain. And so they're asking a question: should we continue to do this? Now that we're rebuilding the temple, now that we are also thinking about rebuilding the city walls of Jerusalem and so forth, should we continue to fast this way? And notice verse 4. This was something that they always did, but notice that God says, say to the people of the land and the priests, when you fasted and mourned in the 5th month and in the 7th month for these 70 years, was it for me that you fasted? Jesus in the New Testament will talk about the idea of how the Pharisees would fast, and they would fast in such a way to where everybody would look at them and say, well, now there's a holy man, because look at his face is drawn. He has been weeping. Maybe he has done all of this. That is a holy man, because he's engaged in this fasting and weeping and so forth. And I think Zechariah, and maybe Jesus could even reference and go back here to this point in time. He said, were you doing that for me? Were you doing it for me? Or were you doing it for show? Were you doing it just to remind yourself of the bad situation that you were living in? Maybe, was it for me that you fasted? And he's just being blunt. And this is applicable to all the people in the land and the priest. And God is saying here, you know what? You weren't doing it for me. When you eat and when you drink, do you not eat for yourselves and drink for yourselves? What was the purpose of fasting? Think about that for just a moment. What was it that was going on to where that would cause somebody to fast? Comments, thoughts?
Well, one reason was to demonstrate repentance, and to deny oneself, food and water or drink for a period of time, to demonstrate to God how serious you're taking the repentance.
Right. And that's the idea, to demonstrate to God that I'm not eating anything. I'm just drinking this water to keep me alive, because I'm mourning. I may be, and we do that a little bit whenever we lose somebody that we love. Everybody brings tons and tons and tons of food to a funeral, right? And most of the time, these ladies have to just throw away a lot of it simply because they can't eat it all. You know what I'm saying there? We try to emphasize how much we care and love people in that respect. Here, up to this point in time, they were going through the motions. They weren't really thinking about what they were doing. And now they're asking, do we have to continue to do that? And again, when you go into the New Testament, you see the same thing going on. These scribes and the Pharisees, they're going to be fasting once a week, all through the time. And everybody's going to be patting them on the back for the kind of holy person that they are. And that's the reason why Jesus would say in the Sermon on the Mount, if you're going to fast, don't tell anybody. It's none of their business. It's between you and God. Just like your prayers are between you and God. You don't need to be out there trying to show that you're extra pious because you're not eating or not doing what you need to be doing in that respect. So God said he said, that's not working. I don't want that. It doesn't work. God had authorized one fast day in all of the Bible. And what day was that? Anybody remember off the top of your head? That's okay. I couldn't either. Had to look it up. It was the Day of Atonement.
I was gonna guess Day of Atonement.
That was it. That was the only day out of the entire year in the Old Testament law that God required that they fasted. One day a year. One day a year. So it's extremely interesting that as you look at it, you see that Jeremiah chapter 41 verse 1, they would fast when the breach was made in the wall of Jerusalem. The 10th month they would fast the 10th month, because that's when the siege began. 2 Kings chapter 25 verse 1 and Jeremiah 25 verse 4. So you see, they thought, well, if one day of atonement is going to get God's attention, let's just fast every one of the days when everything bad happened, when the walls of Jerusalem were conquered, when the siege began. All of these things come into play there. And he says, you know what? But God said, I didn't command that. And so if I didn't command it, why are you doing it? And I think that's a valid question even today. If we're not commanded to do it, then are we supposed to do it just because we want to show people how pious we are? That doesn't impress God at all. And I think sometimes we do get into these situations where we want to show people how we're trying to be the Christians we need to be, but sometimes Some people do it like the Pharisees, just to show everybody else how holy they are. And that's not what it's all about. It's
I got
all
a
about,
question.
okay.
No, I'm sorry. No, go ahead. Finish
No,
the
go
job.
ahead.
I was just going to ask you in Matthew 6:16, Jesus says, when you fast, don't be like the
Right.
hypocrites. So he's talking to his disciples at the time under the old law.
Right.
Do you think that that does not transfer into the new covenant? And you know, kind of why, if not?
I see what you're trying to emphasize, but whenever you think about the fact that Christ did away with all of that at the cross, we remember that he took away the old so that he might establish the new. The Hebrew writer really makes that point in all of it. So is it applicable today? We have pretty well in the church, especially, we've left that to every individual Christian. That's between him and between him and God. I don't know that there is any New Testament command to engage in a fast. We do read that there was a few times in the book of Acts where the Christians would fast and pray. Think again, remember that most of them came out of a Jewish background to begin with. This was what they would be used to. But again, there's no days whatsoever that's mentioned at all in the New Testament where it actually is talking about Christians being engaging in a fast. So we pretty well have made up, that's just up to the individual Christian as to what they do.
Okay, yeah, and I don't have any problem with any of that. I just would note in 2 Corinthians 6 and chapter 11 also, Paul mentions that he is frequently in fastings. Now, it may be that, and perhaps probably is the fact that he was fasting because he did not have adequate food supply. Completely agree with your notion that, or the idea rather, fact that there is no carryover per se. I just wonder about example and command and necessary inference and example. I do wonder whether there is example there in 2 Corinthians, but I wouldn't want to be dogmatic about it either.
And I appreciate that, brother. That's what it's about, that we're trying to learn and so forth. And in a sense, think about it in this way. And I think I mentioned a minute ago that, whenever you go to a funeral or something like that, the families, it's over. You've got this big spread, but some people don't feel like fasting or eating. Their emotions are so wrapped up because of the loss of the loved one. They're fasting. I don't know that they're fasting because of God and trying to get God's attention, like you read a lot in the Old Testament. I do think that it's left up, as I said earlier, to each individual Christian what's going to happen along that line. And it's not a necessary command, but the Pharisees and so forth would continue to do it because they were still wrapped up in the law and they didn't realize it until later. And then, like you said, brother, Paul had done the same thing. And I think on some occasions it was because maybe he couldn't find something to eat. Maybe going from place to place. Maybe they weren't always taking care of him as other churches might have. So all of that, I think, comes into play there. We just need to be very careful always. And if somebody comes up to me and says, you know what, I've been fasting, I'm not going to say anything to them about it. That's between them and God. And it's not a my business. But now if they got up and said, now we command you, God told me to tell you, this is what we're supposed to do from here on out, we're going to have some issues.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that's the way it should be. I do. That's a very, very good question. I think it's something that we need to think about. Here in this place, he's condemning them. He's condemning them because, when you eat, when you drink, you don't eat for yourselves or drink for yourselves. In other words, why are you doing this? This is what I'm wanting you to do. This is what I want. Verse 8 of chapter 7. Render true judgments. Don't just sit around and fast and say, well, I'm trying to get God's attention. He said, you want to get my attention? Whenever you're judging, render true judgments. Show kindness to one another. And I think, again, what he's saying here applies to the church today, in that here in this respect is this not what it's all about? Whenever we think about Christianity and so forth, we should be the ones, as we read in the first century, where they're selling everything they've got to be able to buy food to start feeding people that's hungry. You know what I'm trying to say? He says, you render true judgments, you shine kindness, you show mercy to one another. We remember that in Micah chapter 6, verse 8, he says, you walk humbly with your God. So God is saying, Micah 6, here again in Zechariah, the same idea, show kindness and compassion. Go back and read Hosea chapter 6 at verse 6. Micah 6, verse 8, I already said that a few moments ago. He will say in Jeremiah 7, verse 6, do not oppress the widow. Okay? There should be no evil in our heart toward one another. Isaiah 32, verse 7, and Micah chapter 2, verse 1. So the ideal is if we're going to render true judgments, if we're going to show mercy to one another, then we've got to look at people. And if they need help, we help them. We don't oppress the widows. We don't oppress the fatherless, the sojourner, the poor. And let none of you devise evil against another in your own heart. You see, this is something, like I said, that goes a lot with Micah chapter 6. And I think you see the parallel here. But you know what? Another thing I'm looking at as I see here is that sometimes we in the church, we struggle with this a little bit. Last Sunday, we had a young man come up, and I don't know how old he was, maybe 25, 30, something along that line. And he said he was homeless. And he sat through the worship service. I got the guy that's in charge of benevolence and let him talk to him. I've met brethren in times past. Whenever somebody comes up and asks for help, that sometimes, please understand, I'm trying to say this with the most love and I can, but sometimes some brethren like to give the person a third degree. You know, why ain't you working? Well, you know, maybe he had a legitimate reason why he couldn't work. Maybe there was an issue somehow or another. But we also, I think, are so afraid that we're going to be taken by somebody that we kind of get our hearts closed off because we don't want to encourage idleness. We don't want to encourage a man just going around getting money all over the place to be able to do what he wants to do. So there's always been a struggle for me. I knew of a man that handled it, and he could handle it well in every other situation. I personally, my opinion, and that ain't worth much, but if somebody comes and asks, I don't know that I'm going to do a full background check on them with the police department before I decide to help them. I think God gives us enough sense to know whether or not they're scamming us or whether or not they truly are in need. And let's suppose for just a moment, and this is something that we could spend hours talking about, but just suppose for just a moment that we did help a man that may very well have scammed us. That's on him. That's not on us. And I think we've got to be, we can't be so cold-hearted, and that's not the way to say it either, but we can't be so afraid that somebody's always out to take advantage of us that we don't help the folks that really need it. Thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I agree completely with that. And I'd much rather be taken advantage of than not help someone who actually needs it. Real quick story, I came out of Home Depot a few years ago, and a guy hollered at me from the parking lot, said, "Hey man, I'm hungry. Can you give me something to eat?" I said, "Sure." I said, "There are restaurants right here. Which one? You pick one. I'll buy you lunch." He said, "No, man, just give me some money. I want to buy something to eat." I said, "No, I'll buy you some food, but I'm not gonna give you any money." "Oh man, just give me the money."
Yeah. And in those situations, we don't ever, at South Cobb, we don't ever give away money. We always do is, okay, they didn't have enough money for rent. We'll get in touch with the leaser, and we'll make sure that money that gets paid for. If They said they're hungry. Our guy will go out there and go buy them some food from McDonald's or someplace like that, and we'll give it to them in a heartbeat. Maybe that's just a very small part of the problem, but you're exactly right, Jerry. There's a lot of folks that's out there that it's all about panhandling. And I don't think God wants us to do that. God doesn't want us to encourage that kind of situation. Jim, how do y'all handle it?
Same way you just mentioned that, we'll have somebody talk to them and try to figure out, how much we can help them and that kind of thing. I'm reminded of what Paul told the church in Thessalonica, and I've often referred to this when we have a situation like this. When Paul tells the church, and if a man will not work, let him not eat. It doesn't say he can't work. It says if he will not work. There's a big difference. And sometimes it's a fine line, but I'm like Jerry, comment Jerry made a minute ago, in the fact that I'd much rather somebody scam me than not. And we've had a few people scam us. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Through the years, we've had some people scam us, but yeah. I would rather have that, because like you said, come the day of judgment, that's on them. And I'd much rather that be on them than the good Lord look at me and go, okay, so what about Galatians 6? And it's like, well, yeah, and I've got no excuse. And so that's pretty much the way to, about the only way you can handle it nowadays.
Yeah. And it's a struggle. And, but I find it extremely interesting, like I said, to sit down and discuss it with other brothers, to see what they do and how they handle it. Just think about here, he's condemning them back here in chapter 7 because they weren't taking care of the poor. They were devising evil against one another in their heart, and they were turning a stubborn shoulder and stopped their ears that they might not hear. They didn't want to hear it.
And Tommy, this is exactly why they're in captivity to start with.
That's exactly right. And
I mean, that's what got them there. That's what got them in the mess they're in now. So
yeah. And I often think about this as well, is the fact that you got them in the mess to begin with. And he goes on in verse 12, he said, they made their hearts diamond hard. Their hearts are so hard, nothing could break it. And that's the thing. And he says, lest they should hear the law and the words the Lord has set by the Spirit through the former prophets. So this is another interesting passage of scripture that emphasizes the idea that it's the Spirit who's what? Giving the law, right? Sent by his Spirit through the former prophets. So here's a clear passage that emphasizes what the Spirit's work is to give us the law so that we can understand what God's law and what God expects out of all of us. He goes on and he says, they would not hear, so they called, and I would not hear. God's saying, okay, you won't listen to me, I'm not going to listen to you. And that's sad. I think a lot of people today, you think about this, a lot of people out in the world today, they want a God of their making, a God that's going to let them get away with whatever it is they want to get away with. But when they actually come into contact with the God of the Bible, and they really begin to understand what God is and who God is, I should say, who God is, when they find him as he is portrayed there, then a lot of times they don't want that. They don't want God, because they like the God that they've made in their own image. But we haven't changed a whole lot since even Genesis and so forth, because they were making idols and so forth all through this time.
Hey, Tommy.
Yeah, brother.
Think about the fact too that these are God's chosen people. It makes me wonder how many are sitting in the church today and call to God, and God's not listening because their hearts are not, our hearts are not right either. I mean, it's like you said, all the difference between us and them is time. So yeah.
And that's something to think about. It really is. What if, again, the church really strove to feed the hungry, whether they were Christians or not, trying to help out everybody they possibly could in every way that they possibly could. My wife and I, over the last couple of weeks, we have contacted all of the schools in our area. We're talking probably close to 15, 20 schools. just within a 4.5 mile radius from us. Okay, all the way around. And it's amazing to me how many schools, elementary, high school, and so forth. And we know that some of those families, because we've had these things happen before, we know that some of these families, they're just barely making it. I mean, literally. And these kids are going to school in rags, and they don't, a lot of times, for whatever reason, they're not getting enough nourishment at home. So that's part of the reason why, think about it, the government was giving them all this food that they could give them some breakfast for these families that need it. So we said, okay, look, y'all let us know how many in your family. We'll help provide Thanksgiving dinner for you. And now you think
Hey,
about it.
Tommy,
Yeah.
you
Okay,
know,
go ahead.
to your point, we've got grandchildren that are in school systems that they feed them breakfast and lunch because they realize that a lot of those kids, that's all they're eating a day. And in some cases, they're even taking part of that meal and taking it home to, give their baby brother or sister something to eat. And so it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
We are blind if we can't see the needs of the people around us and do what we can to help them. I would rather, and I'm going to be really outlandish here, and please don't write me off. Okay. But sometimes I think that it would be a good thing if we sold all our buildings and took the money and tried to help a lot of these people get out of that situation. Now, will they ever go all the way through and get better out of all of it? That's obviously going to depend upon them. But we've tried our best to do our best to help them to know God, what God wants and what God expects out of them, and hopefully help them to become the citizens that God wants them to be.
So what are you doing with the Thanksgiving meal, did you say?
Yeah. And again, we're not just giving it to just anybody. We asked specifically to talk to the counselors of the school, because if anybody knows who's got the food and who's not, it's usually the school counselors. And they give us the names. And we then just follow up on the names and say, look, we're providing Thanksgiving dinner for you. Come here and get the stuff Friday. Or yeah, it's Friday or Saturday. Friday or Saturday. Come get the stuff, take it home to be with you. And you're not going to have to pay anything. And we're not just buying them potatoes and stuff like that. We're buying them turkeys, like everybody else does, right? We've got about 40 different families that we're going to try to help this year. And by doing it through the school, then it's not another one of those situations where we're afraid of being scammed, because again, these are people that the counselors know themselves of what's going on in those family units. And I think it's a good thing to do at it. And that's what we do. And so, yeah, me and my wife, we've been spending time buying potatoes, sweet potatoes, all that stuff that you make for a big meal. And think about it this way, more often than not, most of us realize that whenever you're eating Thanksgiving, that you have enough leftovers for how many meals? So just think about how that could happen. And not just, as I'm just saying this out, but don't just do it maybe at Thanksgiving, maybe do it again at Christmas, but also try to see if we can, whenever those families come in, try to get some information from them and try to touch base with them.
So they're actually, are they coming to your church building to pick up the food? Is that what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
There's going to be 4 families that we're going to have to deliver food to. But at the same time, they're actually going to be in the building. We're actually going to give it to them. We're going to also give away a lot of the house to house, heart to heart stuff that we get. And we put it in that with them. And then we hopefully are trying to get their names and phone numbers. My wife has called a lot of them already. So we already got their names and phone numbers. So then after Thanksgiving or something like that, we hope to be able to sit down and start calling some of them and say, how was your Thanksgiving? Would you mind if we come over and visit with you sometime? Yeah. See where it goes from there.
Yeah.
You see, so we could use this not only as a situation where we're feeding people, but we're also using it as a door of opportunity for evangelism.
That's great.
So
we came from in Virginia, we tried to do the same kind of a thing, and we had to go through the school counselors, and the counselors could identify the kids in need, but they wouldn't tell us who they were. They said, if you'll provide XYZ, we'll give it to the kids, but there was no connection between our gift and the church.
In the church, yeah. Well, we're blessed here in the fact that we were able to do it this other way. The counselors have bought on into it, and so like I said, that's what we're going to be doing Saturday. And Friday night we're putting all that stuff together, and Saturday we're going to be passing it out or being there and trying to set up what we can. That's doing what the Lord said. Okay, there we are. All right, let's get back to the text. Well, we've been at it now for what? How long? I don't know. Let me see. Let's take a break. Let's take a few minutes break, and then we'll come back. All right. Okay, glad back. Hope everybody's back and everything. We're continuing in chapter 7 of Zechariah, and coming on down, we talked about some of the things they were doing. He tells to render true judgments, show kindness and mercy to one another, do not oppress the widow, verse 10, the fatherless, the sojourner, the poor, don't devise evil against one another. But I want you to look at this in verse 11. This is interesting. They refused to pay attention and turned a stubborn shoulder and stopped their ears that they might not hear. Okay, listen to that now. They refused to pay attention, turned a stubborn shoulder, stopped their ears. And then he says, they made their hearts diamond hard. Who made their hearts hard? They did. God didn't harden their hearts. God wanting them to be there. And so what was interesting, he says they had their hearts diamond hard that they should hear the law, that the word of the Lord of hosts would send to his spirit through the prophets. Therefore, great anger came from the Lord of hosts. And we see God's anger through a lot of the prophetic books, Isaiah 1:15, Jeremiah 11:11. In Proverbs chapter 1, he says, as I called and they would not hear, so they called and I would not hear, says the Lord. Now, boy, that is a stunning statement. So many times we get into trouble and we pray, and we're praying, believing that God is listening to us. But the question is, from this passage of scripture, if we're not willing to listen to the word of God, if we're not willing to open it, if we're not willing to teach it, if we're not willing to help others to understand this, if we're not listening, God is not hearing. He won't hear us. Now, this is what he said to the Jews at that point in time. And so what a struggle this is. So he said, I scattered them with a whirlwind among all the nations that they had not known. The land was left desolate, and the pleasant land was made desolate. So the reason why they all got in this mess to begin with is because they called upon God to save them whenever they got themselves in a mess, but they wouldn't listen to what he had told them to do to stay out of the mess. And so this is extremely, as I was reading this and as I read it again and again, I've got this underlined in my Bible. You know what? They would not hear, so they called and I would not hear. I'm just giving you exactly what you're doing for me. Does God do the same thing today? I think so. If he did it back then, he does it today. So for us to want God to listen to our prayers necessarily means that we need to be doing what he has told us to do. And that necessarily means a great deal of Bible study and making sure that more than that, that we're applying the Bible in the way that God intended for it to be applied. All righty. So we're coming on to chapter 8. In chapter 8, he's now giving he talked about in chapter 7 a call for justice and mercy, making that plea once again to the people of that day. Now he says, let me tell you about what's going to happen, the coming peace and prosperity of Zion. And there's a promise of the future. Now, earlier, God had emphasized the idea that the reason why he was giving Zechariah this message, he's talking about the day of the Lord and how God was going to punish them. He commended them for the fact that they repented, but they usually would go back doing the same old thing all over again. So the word of the Lord came, chapter 8, verse 1. Thus says the Lord, I'm zealous for Zion with great jealousy, and I'm jealous for her with great wrath. I have returned to Zion and will dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem shall be called the faithful city, and the mountain of the house of the Lord's, or the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. Thus says the Lord, old men and old women shall again sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each with a staff in his hand because of great age. Now, as you're listening to this, he's saying, I'm rebuilding the city. I want this rebuilt. I want it done that way. I have returned to Zion. I am in your midst once again. I'm dwelling in there among you. Think about how in the New Testament, he brings out the idea that the Spirit dwells in us. Think about the idea that through the Spirit, that God dwells in us. So here you have somewhat a prophetic idea of when the Spirit was going to come and that they were going to dwell in the people. And he says, they shall sit in the streets of Jerusalem. They're not going to be afraid of another army coming up and taking them into captivity again and again and again and again. They don't have to worry about that. I'm taken care of. The boys and girls are playing in the streets. And what God is emphasizing is he says, you know what? I had withdrawn from the city earlier because of the way you were living. And by the way, another parallel passage that you can look at in this respect is Ezekiel 9, verse 3, Ezekiel 10, verse 4 and 19, and Ezekiel 11, verse 23. For God to return to the land, the people had to be transformed. For us to be able to live with God forever in heaven, we have to be transformed. God doesn't have to be transformed. He is who he is. But if we're going to live with him, we've got to make sure that we're where we need to be. And that's the reason why, what is it that's going to help the people of that day and today? It's knowing what God's law says and living it to the very best of our ability. So as it goes on, he says, it's just a beautiful picture of peace and joy. Jeremiah 18, verses 7 through 10. And you see all this was going on. And he says, if it is marvelous in the sight of the remnant of this people in those days, should it also be marvelous in my sight? And the question he's in essence is asking, you know what? Will their unbelief keep them from doing what I want them to do? Now, that's what was the problem with the children of Israel all along. And I'm not trying to make a blanket statement, but I think sometimes that's the problem with the church. We know what we need to be doing, but we're not always doing it. We know what we ought to be doing, but that's what we pay the preacher for. We know we need to visit the sick, but that's what the elders are supposed to do, or the deacons. We know that we need to be reading and studying our Bible. Well, that's mainly for the Bible class teachers, right? Tell me what you learned this week, Bible class teacher, and I'll just accept it, hook, line, and sinker, whether it's the truth or not. You see, what we read here, again, fits the church sometimes. And God is saying to them, he said, I want to dwell with you. I want to live with you. I want you to have this peace. I want you to rejoice in this. He says, if it's marvelous in the sight of the remnant of the people of those days, should it also be marvelous in my sight, declares the Lord? I will save my people from the east country, from the west country, and I will bring them to dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God. Now, that's a familiar passage. The Hebrew writer quotes this in Hebrews 12:22, and in Galatians chapter 4, verse 26, Paul quotes this passage. So he now is taking it from the Jewish background to now applying it to the church. And what a beautiful picture that is. So they're going to have peace. They're not going to have to worry about soldiers coming and take them into captivity. Kids are going to be playing in the street. Everything is going to be fine. And again, I'm going to save them from all the peoples in the world, and they're going to be my people. Is this a prophetic reference to the church? I think so. But it's also a beautiful reference that sometimes maybe we don't in the church appreciate or evaluate enough as we need to. We are his people. He bought us with his blood. That necessarily means he is our God. So he's the God that we've got to be faithful to, and he's the God that we've got to live righteously before. So he says, let your hands be strong. You have been hearing the words from the mouth of the prophets. Listen to the prophets. Listen to them. Now, you think about if they were in 20th century America, 21st century America. Oh, there's a guy standing on the street. He's some Jesus freak. Just ignore him, you know. I can't say, I don't know, I wasn't there, but I sometimes wonder as these prophets got out preaching these messages to where everybody could hear it, they probably, some of them were sitting back saying, here's a crazy man. Why should we listen to this guy? But you see, that's what got them into trouble to begin with, right? They wouldn't listen to the word of the Lord. And so he says, you keep on building that. He said, you who in these days have been hearing these words from the mouth of the prophets, from the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid that the temple might be built. There was no wage for man or any wage for beast. Neither was there any safety from the foe for him. I set every man against his neighbor. But I will not deal with the remnant of this people as in the former days. There will be a sowing of peace. The vine shall give its fruit. There's going to be plenty of food. The heavens shall give their due. And I will cause the remnant of this people to possess all these things. Is it all just about material blessings, food, clothing, shelter? No. I think he's trying to emphasize the idea that God is going to bless them in spiritual ways. When they got the spirit right, when they've got the spirit of the relationship between them and God right, they had something to look forward to. They had something that they could lean on. They could trust God. And he says, I proposed to bring disaster to you when your fathers provoked me to wrath. And I did not relent. He says, that's the reason why your fathers wound up in captivity. But he says, I've purposed in these days to bring good to Jerusalem and the house of Judah. Fear not. Now look in verse 13 and look again in verse 15. You shall be a blessing, fear not, but let your hands be strong. And then he says again in verse 15, fear not. Let me ask you something, just something off the top of my head. You think the church today is afraid? Yes, no, maybe so. Are we afraid to share the gospel? Are we living in a culture where door knocking just kind of scares us simply because we don't know what's behind that door? Are we using that as an excuse not to try to share the gospel with other people? What is it that's keeping us from building the church? Now, this whole context in Zechariah was that they were rebuilding the temple, right? Now it's our job to build the church. And again, we're not talking about bricks and mortar. We're not talking about signs. We're not talking about floors and pews and all that. We're talking about building the church, building the people. Hopefully we're doing it every Sunday whenever we gather together and trying to teach the church their responsibilities and so forth. But again, what about the lost? What about the people that's around us? How many people drive 5 or 10 miles to go to the congregation we go to, but pass by all these other people that aren't going to church anywhere on Sunday? I'm not saying that we're going to get all of them, but at the same time, should we not give it our very best shot, try to build the church, the temple of God today? And again, we're doing it not with bricks and stones, but with people. And that's probably the hardest part about it, right? Because whenever we are rejected, whenever we kind of, please understand what I'm about to say, kind of butt heads with somebody that looks at the Bible a certain way and they won't listen to it from the other viewpoint, But before I pick up a stone and throw at them, I've got to ask myself, am I giving them the same courtesy that I want them to give to me? Right? You see what I'm trying to say here? He said things were bad before. There was no wage for man or beast or anything else. But I'm not going to deal with these people the same way I did in the former days. For there shall be peace. The vine shall give its fruit. The heavens shall give their due. And as you have been a byword of cursing among the nations, I'm going to save you, and you shall be a blessing. So fear not. True or false, we in the church are fearful.
Some certainly are.
Huh?
I said some certainly are.
Yeah, I agree with you there 100%. You're right. Why are we so afraid of it?
I think it depends on what you're talking about. Fear to knock on a door is different, say, from fear to live a Christian life amongst the ungodly. There's different ways that fear can be generated, I think.
Right.
So if you're talking just about evangelism, I'm actually teaching an evangelism class and getting ready to finish that up. But we've emphasized that you don't have to fear. Just start small and work your way up. You just drop a business card on a table somewhere, like just a starting point. But we're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to get their feet wet. But since you're on that topic very quickly, evangelism is the mission of the church, and it has to be emphasized all the time. It can't be a flash in the pan kind of thing or some fireworks and then it goes away for 6 months or several years. It has to be done all the time. And that's what I'm trying to help bring to our congregation, is just that culture of always thinking and doing evangelism.
Yeah. And I think that's what's got to happen again today. The first century church went out and spread the gospel to the world. It seemed like there was no fear. In fact, as you look in the first century church, whenever they were persecuted, that's when they doubled down and grew even more, right? So maybe we've become, and I like what you had to say, Jerry, and the fact that, yeah, we do that, but sometimes maybe we have we in the church left the idea, have we in God's temple today, the church, left the idea that it's all just about coming to the temple, singing the songs, partaking of the Lord's Supper, listening to somebody orate, then committing making sure we give our portion and then go home. Is that what God wants? No, He wants the gospel to the world. And that necessarily means we've got to get out of the building and start doing that a little bit more. And personally, I've taken a lot of these courses and so forth. And sometimes it just does get easier sometimes just to sit in the building and writing bulletin articles or studying for sermons and stuff like that than it is to go out there and start really studying with people. Go ahead, brother.
I was just agreeing with you.
It is. And that's a struggle that we've got to really overcome. And we've got to remind the brethren that it's not just the preacher's job or the elder's job or the deacon's job, But we need to, in love, tell them if we want this church to grow to be what God wants it to be, we've got to share the gospel. They may reject it, but let them not reject it because they didn't know it. Let them reject it because they knew it, but chose not to do it. So he says, as I purpose to bring bad things to your fathers, I'm now purposing to bring good things to Jerusalem. So speak the truth to one another. Render in your judgments that are true and make for peace. Do not devise evil in your hearts against one another. Love no false oath, for all these things I hate, says the Lord. I don't know about you, but every time I see passages where it says God hates something, okay, I need to pay a definite attention to that one, right? Because if he hates it, I want to make sure I don't do it. And the word of the Lord came to me. Thus says the Lord, the fast of the 4th month, the fast of the 5th, the 7th, the 10th, and the house of Judah, joy and gladness and cheerful feast, therefore love, truth, and peace. Now you'll notice there were 4 different fasts. Earlier we had talked about the fact that they had continued in these fasts and so forth, and they weren't handling it the way they were supposed to. Now he's saying, all right, the 4th month, the 5th month, the 7th month, and the 10th month is no longer going to be times of sorrow, but it's going to be times of joy and gladness. Why the 4th, the 5th, the 7th, and the 10th month? Nebuchadnezzar came against Jerusalem in the 10th month, the very first time. Okay. Then he made a breach in the wall of Jerusalem in the 4th month. So he came in the 10th month and he kept battering and so forth all the way up through 6 months, from the 10th month all the way up to the 4th month, where he finally breached the wall of the city. Then he burned the house of the Lord in the 5th month. He burned the house of the Lord in the 5th month, and Gedaliah, the priest, had been killed in the 7th month. So the reason why he gives these different months, 4th, 5th, 7th, and 10th, is because certain events took place in their history that brought them to that point. So he says, what you need to do is love truth and love peace. My fervent prayers in the Lord's church today is that we would love truth and love peace, that we'd work hard at being at peace with one another, and that we share the truth no matter what the cost. So he says, people shall yet come, even the inhabitants of many cities. Let us go at once to entreat the favor of the Lord and seek the Lord of hosts, for I myself am going. In other words, here's evangelism, Jerry. Here's what he's saying. Let us go to entreat the favor of the Lord, to seek the Lord. I'm going. Okay. So we're going to try to talk to somebody about the gospel and say, I'm going. This is kind of what it boils down to. Many people, strong nations shall come to seek the Lord of hosts in Jerusalem and entreat the favor of the Lord. In those days, 10 men from the nations of every tongue shall take hold of a robe of a Jew. Let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. This passage really impacts, and as I was thinking about it, from an evangelistic viewpoint, Jerry, is that's the way it's going to change. That's the way it's going to change today. That's how we've got to do it. We've got to be fired up. We've got to beg God's help. We seek his, and then we ourselves are getting involved in it in every which way that we can.
Yeah.
That's the challenge. That's what we need to be doing. Jerry, was you going to say something?
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Okay. All right. So as you've looked through Zechariah, and as we've looked through the minor prophets up to this point in time, you've seen God's people being in trouble. Now, like in every other one of these things, he starts to talk about Israel's enemies and what's going to happen to them. Damascus would be the place of Syria. He said Damascus is in its resting place. The Lord is an eye on mankind. That's an idea there that could preach. The Lord has an eye on mankind. He knows everybody, and he knows everybody and everybody's thinking and everything like that. What if the church today understood that idea? You know what? He knows what we're doing. He knows what we're thinking. He knows what we're saying. What if every one of us really truly lived that way? Would that make me stop and think about what I was going to say before I said it sometimes? Would that cause me to make sure that I didn't go in a place that I didn't want him to find me in? You know what I'm trying to say? If we all live that life that way, the Lord has an eye on mankind and all the tribes of Israel. Tyre and Sidon, she built a rampart and heaped up silver like dust, fine gold, but the Lord's going to strip her of her possessions. Again, another thing that I think is very important for us to realize as we're looking in the Old Testament is he's emphasizing the idea that all the stuff you've got doesn't necessarily mean you've got it. Because there could be somebody else come in there and take it just like that, right? But I got insurance to cover me. Really? Okay. It's just not the same, right? It's not the same. The Lord will strip her of her possessions. These enemies of Israel, strike her down, her power on the sea, and she shall be devoured by fire. Ashkelon, Gaza, they shall rise in anguish and be afraid. Ekron, because its hopes are confounded. Now he's judging or punishing all these other nations that have had impact with the children of Israel. So he has brought them back. They are working on the temple. They are working on the city of Jerusalem. They are times of rejoicing. He's continuing to encourage them. And as he looks at it, he says, don't be afraid of these people that come and have attacked you before. I'm going to take care of them. I'm going to take care of them. And so the king shall perish from Gaza. That would be having reference to the Philistines, because he goes on and mentions Ashdod, cut off the pride of Philistia and take away its blood from its mouth. And it too shall be a remnant for our God. It shall be like a clan in Judah. So even the Philistines who give the children of Israel a hard time, God was willing to take them. This was a very important thing, because God is emphasizing it's not just the Jewish nation that I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about the whole world. And we see that whole idea in the New Testament brought out more than ever, right? Going to all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, right? And they strive to the very best of their ability in the first century to do just that. And today we have all these extra means of doing it, and we don't always get to doing it like we need to. He goes on in verse 9. There's this time of rejoicing. And now he's going to start talking about the coming King of Zion. And we're going to know exactly who he is. He says, your king is coming to you. Righteous in salvation is he. Humble and mounted on a donkey. On a colt, the foal of a donkey. Oh, well, now, wait a minute. That automatically rings bells for all of us that are Christians, right? Because remember, whenever he entered into the city of Jerusalem the last time, he entered in on a colt as a king going to take over in that situation. And so that's what he's emphasizing. And he says, your king is coming, verse 9, chapter 9 at verse 9. He's emphasizing again, this was prophecy in Zephaniah 3:14, Zechariah 2:10, Isaiah 9:6, and then Matthew 21:5, Mark 11:7, Luke 19:38. So he came in to the city of Jerusalem not riding a victorious war horse, because that's not his way of winning. It's not forcing people to become Christians. It's letting them make the decision. And so he comes as a king, a just king, having salvation. The New King James Version says, again in chapter 9 at verse 9, he says, humble and mounted on a donkey. He's righteous and having salvation. I'll cut off the chariot from Ephraim, the horse from Jerusalem. The battle bow shall be cut off. He shall speak peace to the nations. And his dominion shall be from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. That 2 verses will preach forever right there. I'm telling you, there is so much to unpack from that. Think about the idea. He's a king. Think about how he came to bring salvation. He come lowly on the back of a donkey. He didn't have like we have we're in this election cycle now. We're getting ready to vote for another president. And it's all about vote for me, vote for me, vote for me. I'll do this. I'll promise this. I promise that. I do this and we do that and the other. And please be patient with me, but I don't have much patience with much of that, because they promise the world, and all they seem like they do sometimes is just get us deeper in debt and want more tax money. Yeah, I trust you guys. You've done a great job up till now, and I'm being very facetious here. Please don't misunderstand me. Paul was saying in Romans 12 that we don't speak against evil, against a ruler, but did God speak against some of his kings in his nations? Yeah. Did he tell it like it was? Yeah. So there's something to be said about that. He came in a way that we never would have ever imagined, in a way that is just, you don't go in a king, you wear a war horse. And he says, he speaks to all the nations, not just the Jews. God's plan from the very beginning of the world was not just the Jews. The only reason he had the Jews was so that Jesus could come through the lineage that he said they would. And so he said, I'm going to cut off all these war machines. That's the king of peace. Remember, I said earlier that the chariot was something like the modern day tank, and that in those days. So think about the idea. I'm going to cut off the tanks and the horse from Jerusalem. The battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall speak peace to the nations. The only way we're going to have peace among nations today is if everybody bought into the gospel. That's it. That's why we need to at least give people a chance to do that. And we need to be living that peace among ourselves. And I will make this statement because sometimes I see it in the church, and you do too. Sometimes there's not as much peace in the church that there needs to be. Amen. And the reality is that people come in here and they see that the peace is not what it needs to be. So therefore they say, well, I can get that from something I'm watching on television. God's kingdom, Jesus' kingdom, is a kingdom of peace. Whenever Jesus came to the earth in Luke chapter 2, he emphasized peace on earth, goodwill toward men, all men, not just the Jews, all men. So I think that's something that we need to work on a lot more in the church. I'm not saying that every church has these problems, but I've been preaching for a while. I've been preaching a long time here at South Cobb. I can tell when something's going on. It doesn't take much. I can tell when something's going on. I can tell when somebody's having some struggles. And that's the time whenever we need to step up and say, what's going on? What can I do to help? Well, sister so-and-so did this, Okay, when did they do that? 15 years ago. Well, wait a minute. Whoa. You're still holding a grudge from 15 years back. I'm not making this stuff up. And Jim is agreeing with me there. You can't make this stuff up. God demands that our kingdom that we're a part of now or his kingdom is a kingdom of peace. And that's what he says. And his dominion shall be from where? His dominion is from sea to sea. Put it in modern day English, his dominion is the whole world. Think about it that way. He created the heavens and the earth. So yeah, we as human beings have the responsibility to do what we need to be doing for him. And from the river to the ends of the earth. So here's this king that Israel had defeated her enemies. Now there was a time of peace. This king came. Again, you can't help but see the Messianic ideas in the New Testament. Again, bringing those ideas out in Luke and Mark and Matthew. And then he says, because of the blood of your covenant. Now notice, as for you also, because of the blood of your covenant. Whose covenant? The king's covenant. The context says it's the king's covenant. So because of the blood of your covenant, I will set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. The blood of your covenant. Jesus is King of Kings, Lord of Lords. We understand that from the book of Revelation. And because he shed his own blood, he says what? The prisoner shall be set free. Return to the stronghold. You prisoners of hope, I declare that I will restore double to you. I have bent Judah, my bow, fitted the bow with Ephraim, raised up your sons against your sons, O Greece, and made you like the sword of a mighty man. Notice the idea in verse 13. He emphasizes specifically here that his sons have been raised up, Zion's sons have been raised up, but he specifically mentions Greece. So he's talking now roughly the time frame when all this is happening, right? Jesus came to the earth during what who was in charge? It was the Romans, but who had been in charge before the Romans? The Greeks. What language were they speaking? Greece. Why? That was the universal language all across the globe at that time, because the Greeks spread their language. So he's saying here, I don't think this by accident. He's saying against your sons and made you like the sword of a mighty man. So who did this? The Lord did it. It was carrying out the plan from before the foundation of the world. Here again, we see Jesus. And again, as you look at this, he's fighting for the souls of everybody. And we are his army. We are his church, and we are the ones that need to do what we can to give people at least the chance to do what they need to do. Then the Lord will be seen over them. His arrow shall go forth like lightning. He shall blow the trumpet and go with whirlwinds from the south. Whirlwinds, I think a lot of times of hurricanes, tornadoes. Think about how fast they travel. There it is. The Lord of hosts will defend them. Who? His people that he just finished talking about. Us, Christians. And he says, they shall devour and subdue with sling stones, drink and roar as if with wine, and they shall be filled with blood like basins. The corners of the altar. In the King James, and that's from the New King James Version. In the Revised Standard Version, verse 15. Let's see, where am I? Chapter 10.
There are 9.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate that. 10:9. That's where I was.
No, I'm sorry. But you're right in the chapter. You're in chapter 9:15, right?
Thank you, brother. Thank you. That's it. Yeah. Fill blood with basins. He shall see them. And they shall be like jewels in his crown. Grain make the young men thrive. The new wine to the young women. So yeah, he saved his people, the Greeks, from the Greeks, and as well as the Romans as well. He's defending them. He's taking care of them. And so how great is his goodness? He again is going to be talking about here in chapter 10. His arrows going forth. He's standing for what's right. That's it. Chapter 10 or 9, verse 14, where he says, he shall march forth into the whirlwinds of the south, and the Lord will protect them. The Lord will save them. The Lord will take care of them. And beautiful passage in verse 17, how great is its goodness and how great its beauty. In the English Standard Version is how great is his goodness and how great his beauty. Well, again, I think the idea that we could just think about how beautiful peace would be, because we don't know a lot about it now, right? We really don't. We struggle a lot with peace in the church, outside, in our jobs, in the world. And God never meant for us to live that way. He really didn't. So going on to chapter 10. Keep rocking along here. Ask the Lord for rain in the time of the latter rain. Okay, now this would be about the time whenever the rain was right before the harvest. The grain would really bud out after the rain, and now they're being taken in. So that they would have something to eat. The Lord, he says, makes the storm clouds, and he will give them showers of rain to everyone the vegetation in his field. So it's a promise here to Judah and Israel that he's going to continue to bless them as they continue to build the temple. But there also was very prophetic ideas of on down the line, and we've already talked about some of those. He says, the household gods utter nonsense. Diviners see lies. So he's still reminding them, listen, I've condemned these things. You need to stay away from them. Therefore, the people wander like sheep and are afflicted for lack of a shepherd. John chapter 10, Jesus is the good shepherd. He knows his sheep. He takes care of his sheep. He will discipline his sheep if necessary because he wants what's best for us. And that's the beautiful picture that we find in John 14. So he says they are afflicted for lack of a shepherd. But they're also talking about Jesus becoming that shepherd. What does he say earlier? Verse 10, chapter 10, verse 3, I'm sorry. My anger is hot against the shepherd, and I will punish the leaders. Why? They haven't been taking care of the flock. I think I mentioned to you last week the idea that South Cobb right now, we're going through the process of getting new elders again. And again, the thing is that elders sometimes forget that their main job is not to spend the money. Their main job is to save the souls of everybody out there. And if they see a sheep being drawn away, their responsibility is to bring that sheep back before it's too late. So here, this was something that was going on back again in Zechariah's day. The shepherds weren't watching out for the people. That's part of the reason why they had gone through captivity after captivity after captivity. God was still trying to get their attention time after time after time. And he says they are afflicted because they don't have a shepherd. So he says, my anger is hot against the shepherds. I will punish the leaders, for the Lord cares for his flock. Now, isn't that a beautiful picture? Again, going back to the picture of John 14, where again, he's the good shepherd. Consider Jesus being the good shepherd here, caring for the flock. The flock is the church. He cares for every sheep that's in that church. He will take care of the lambs, the new converts. He will do what he can to help to birth other sheep. That's what the church's mission is, right? He will discipline sheep that are being recalcitrant, that are being obnoxious. He will discipline the ram that is out there to fight other sheep. But it's his mission, just to get and cause trouble all the time. Here you have the elder's job doing all this. He said, I'm going to punish the leaders. He said, because I care for the flock, and I'll make them like majestic steed in battle. So from God comes the cornerstone, the tent peg, the battle bow. From him, every ruler, all of them together, they shall be like mighty men in battle, trampling the foe in the mud of the streets, and they shall fight because the Lord is with them, and they shall put to shame the riders on horses. So here is, think about this idea as he's rebuilding Judah and Israel after the captivity, as they're coming back, as they're rebuilding the wall, as they're rebuilding the temple. He's telling them now, this is what I need out of the elders. This is what I need out of the shepherds. This is what I need them to be doing. I expect them to be like mighty men in battle. What if we preach that to the shepherds in the church today? Mighty men in battle. Well, that's not too far fetched either, is it? Because isn't it the Apostle Paul who emphasized that we all should put on the armor of God? Isn't it the Apostle Paul that suggests the idea to Christians today that we're fighting battles against evil? that have been fought since the foundation of the world? Have we made the church too nice? You know what I'm trying to say? We're afraid of offending somebody somewhere down the line, so we're afraid of hurting somebody's feelings. Is that really for our best efforts? Is that really what we need to be doing? Or should godly men arise, truly acting like elders, disciplining the flock, helping the flock to grow, because the food that they're eating is what's going to help them to grow? Obviously, the Word of God. When one part of the flock starts, and understand what I'm about to say, starts butting the others with the head, that sheep needs to be dealt with. That sheep needs to be dealt with, because if they continue to stir this trouble up, none of the sheep are ever going to feel comfortable enough to eat the Word of God and grow and be what God wants and expects of them to be. It's a beautiful picture. And he's emphasizing, he says, I'm going to make them like this majestic steed in battle. I'm going to strengthen them. I will save the house of Joseph, God says, chapter 10, verse 6. I will bring them back because I have compassion on them. What a beautiful story again. I'm bringing these people back from captivity. I have compassion on them. Well, God, if you had compassion, why did you send them in captivity? Because they needed to be taught a lesson. He's the good shepherd. These people needed to be taught that they couldn't get away with sin. In the church today, with the greatest amount of love that we possibly can, we've got to, with tears rolling down our eyes, confront the sin that's there and deal with it. Because sometimes we make mistakes as elders, deacons, leaders, preachers. Sometimes as a result, the church suffers. And then we have to build back because of all the problems. There's so much to be said here. God said, I'll bring them back because I'll have compassion on them. And they shall be as though I had not rejected them. Well, God, weren't you the one that sent us into captivity? Yes, I did. But I'm going to love on you so much that you're going to sit back and say, you know what? I didn't reject you. It was us that did it. We were the ones that messed up. He said, Ephraim shall become like a mighty warrior. Their hearts shall be glad as wine. Their children shall see it and be glad. Their hearts shall rejoice. Why? I have redeemed them. Now, a lot of times, this figure is something that I have a little bit more understanding. I told you before, I was raised on a farm in Alabama. We had hogs and we had cattle. We didn't have any sheep. But you know what? I could go out and say a certain word or yell a certain word, and every last one of those hogs would come up whenever, because I was feeding them. They knew every time I said that word, it's feeding time. Of course, later on, we bought one of those big old bins. You just pour the corn in it and they get it anytime they want it. But you know what I'm trying to say there? The bottom line is all I had to do was just say a certain word. They would come running. And again, at one point, we had over 100 head of hogs, and we had about 85 head of cattle. I'd call the cows. You know, I'd sound, and they recognized my voice, and they knew it was time to eat. And I'd put the hay out there and take care of them. And I was as I was reading that, I was just sitting there thinking, Jesus, God is calling and whistled for all of us. Why? He's redeemed us. He wants us with him. And that's something that I think we need to emphasize even that much more in the church today. God wants not just those that's in the church to be with him. He wants the whole world to be with him. So again, it emphasizes to me that he would care about everybody. He said, even though I scattered them among the nations, in far countries, they shall remember me. and with their children they shall live and return. I will bring them home from the land of Egypt, from gathering them from Assyria. I'll bring them to the land of Gilead and to Lebanon, till there's no room for them. And he shall pass through the sea of troubles, strike down the waves of the sea. All the depths of the Nile shall be dried up. That reminds us of when they was taken into captivity and how, again, they would come be saved later on. The pride of Assyria shall be laid low. I will make them strong in the Lord, and they shall walk in his name. Have you noticed from the beginning to the book of Zechariah till now, it's now the idea of what? My people, my flock, they're coming back. Open your doors, O Lebanon, chapter 11, that the fire may devour your cedars. Wail, O Cypress, for the cedar has fallen. Great oak, glorious oak have trees have ruined. Wail, oaks of Bashan, for the thick forest has failed. The sound of the wail of the shepherds, for their glory is ruined. The sound of the roar of the lions, for the thicket of the Jordan is ruined. And the Lord said, thus the Lord my God, thus said the Lord my God, become shepherd of the flock doomed to slaughter. Those who buy them slaughter them and go unpunished. And he says, you know what? Those who come back and they feel like now they could take advantage of those people that have come back from these captivities. He says, you know what? I'm not going to have pity on these people that are not treating everybody else right. I will cause each of them to fall into the hand of his neighbor, in the hand of his king, and they shall crush the land, and I will deliver none from their hand. So I became the shepherd of the flock, doomed to be slaughtered. Listen to that in chapter 11, verse 7. I became the shepherd of the flock, doomed to be slaughtered by the sheep traders. Who is that? Jesus. Jesus. And he says, I took two staffs, named one favor, the other union. I tended the sheep. 1 month I destroyed the 3 shepherds, but I became impatient with them, and they also detested me. And I said, I will not be your shepherd. What is to die, let it die. What is to be destroyed, let it be destroyed. Those who devour the flesh of one another. And I took my staff favor and broke it, annulling the covenant that I made with all the people. So it was annulled on that day. Now he starts talking about annulling the covenant. What does that remind us of? Tied in close together, where he says, become shepherd of the flock doomed to be slaughtered. Remember the idea earlier, he emphasized the idea that he was going to die. So he's just continuing that idea. So he says, in essence, let it be destroyed. I took all of this. I annulled that Old Testament covenant. It was annulled on that day. And they knew this was the word of the Lord. So we understand that the Old Testament law was going to be annulled, broken. God was going to do away with it. And so then he says, okay. And again, listen to the poetic way of putting this. The flock was going to be doomed to slaughter because, again, they had no law as it was. But he says, don't give up yet. If it seems good to you, give me my wages, but if not, keep them. And they weighed out for my wages what? 30 pieces of silver. And there again is where we find the idea of the Lord being the good shepherd and at the same time dying for the flock, dying for us. And so he says, I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to do whatever is necessary in that respect. I'm trying to find the parallel passage where that is. Let's see, we're looking at verse 11, 12. Yeah, he says, so they weighed out for my wages 30 pieces of silver. And where would that be? In verse 12, is good in your sight. Remember in Matthew 27, verses 3 through 10, how much did Judas pay? Or how much did the Pharisees pay Judas for ratting out Jesus? Think about close to 500 years before that has happened. They're talking about the very event of the death on the cross and what it cost and what they were willing to sell for that. And notice he says, the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, the lordly price at which I was priced by them. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord to the potter. What did Judas do when he realized what he had done? He took the 30 pieces of silver that the priests had given him. He threw it back down. And what was their response? What is that to us? You see to it. And what did Judas do? Went out right after that and hung himself. He hung himself. So you see how everything is being fulfilled from what he's saying here. We see Jesus in all of this. Jesus in all of this. So he broke the second staff union, annulling the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. He did away with that Old Testament law at that same time. So take once more the equipment of a foolish shepherd. I'm raising up in the land a shepherd who does not care for those being destroyed, or seek the young, or heal the maimed, or nourish the healthy, but devours the flesh of the fat ones, tearing off even their roots, hoofs. And I think what he's talking about here in verses 15 through 17 is the idea of after the death of Christ and Jesus was taken up into heaven, began the church. What slowly began to happen shortly thereafter? The Jews rebelled against the Romans. Then what? Then they had, because the Jews were not listening to Jesus. They did not listen to what Jesus had to say. So now they had to pay again the ultimate price for their failure to obey God. And the Romans took them into captivity. Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. But Jesus' church wasn't. And we're here today because of that. So the flock, again, was doomed to slaughter. We've talked about it all through the minor prophets, but this book really is trying to take us through the Philistine, Assyrian, Babylonian, and now is even prophesying of the time of what? It's talking about the time of when the Romans were going to take them. So as you continue in the passage, the oracle of the word of the Lord concerning Israel, chapter 12, verse 1, thus declares who stretched out the heavens and founded the earth and formed the spirit of man within him. I'm about to make a Jerusalem a cup of staggering to all the surrounding people. He's continuing to talk about what's going to happen when Jerusalem is destroyed in AD 70. I'll make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the people. All who lift it shall surely hurt themselves. All the nations of the earth shall gather against it. On that day, I'll strike every house with panic and every rider with madness, but for the sake of the house of Judah, I will keep my eyes open. I will strike every horse of the peoples with blindness. Then the clans of Judah shall say to themselves, the inhabitants of Jerusalem have strength through the Lord of hosts, their God. Jerusalem may be destroyed, but God's people aren't. They are going to serve God no matter what. I'll make Judah like a blazing pot in the midst of wood, flaming torch among the seas, and they shall devour to the right and to the left all the surrounding people, while Jerusalem shall again be inhabited in its place in Jerusalem. Now the question is he talking about Jerusalem again being rebuilt another time after the destruction of AD 70? Possibly. But I think more in my viewpoint, if you have a different opinion, please let me know, is not talking so much about an earthly Jerusalem as he's talking about the heavenly Jerusalem. And can't nobody touch them there because they're with the Father, the Son, the Spirit. And so this Jerusalem, he's protecting them so that they shall be like David, and the house of David shall be like God, like the angel of the Lord, striving. Let's see, wait a minute. Yeah, striving, going up against them. And on that day, I'll destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. So I think chapter 12 begins now to talk to us about what happened in the time of the Romans. And I'll pour out of the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace. How on the house of David? Because Jesus is a descendant of David. And when they look on me, on whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him. Remember, Mary and Martha were weeping at the cross unashamedly. The disciples took off and run. And then he says, they shall mourn for him as one mourned for an only child, and weep bitterly over him as one weeps over a firstborn. And he says that on that day, the mourning shall be as great as the mourning for Hadad Rimmon in the plain of Megiddo. The land shall mourn, every family by itself. The house of the family of David, the house of Nathan, the house of Levi, the house of the Simeonites. And on that day, there shall be a fountain opened for the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from sin and uncleanness. We cannot see any other way to interpret this passage here in Zechariah 12 than to talk about the destruction of Jerusalem because of Jesus, who they killed. And he says there's going to be a fountain to cleanse them from sin and uncleanness. Isn't that a beautiful story? And again, think about 600-700 years before this event took place, Zechariah was prophesying about him. And what a beautiful picture. And on that day, all the idols of the land are going to be gone. They shall be remembered no more. Why? Because we all serve the one God. We're not serving idols. We're serving God. If anyone again prophesies, the father and mother who bore him will say to him, you shall not live. You shall not speak lies in the name of the Lord. Why? Well, there's a lot of people today that claim to be prophets, right? They're telling lies. But the thing is, look at this passage here. His father and mother who bore him says, you shall not live. Why? Because you're telling lies. You're telling the lies. Think about the idea when Jesus died, he did away with the Old Testament law. All that was done away with. He instituted the New Testament law. That's what we're under today. And now he's emphasizing the idea of what? Don't trust in just any and every prophecy that's out there. If more members of the church, as well as people, would read and understand what he's saying here in the book of Zechariah, man, that would probably stop a lot of false teaching. Because he had prophesied about it. And he says, you know what? On that day, every prophet shall be ashamed of his vision when he prophesies. He'll not put on a hairy cloak in order to deceive, but he said, I'm no prophet. I'm a worker of the soil. A man sold me in my youth. I said, what are these wounds on your back? The wounds I received in the house of my friends. Again, referring after Jesus was raised from the grave. The wounds. The disciples did not believe that it was Jesus. And think about the idea that one of them, I can't remember who it is, somebody refresh my memory, but one of them said, I'm not going to believe until I put my hands in his side. I want to say that's Peter.
Thomas.
Thomas, thank you. Oh, namesake. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I should, doubting Thomas. Yes, right. I just went blank a minute ago. So please bear with me here. Yeah. Think about it. Unless I put my hand in his side, I will not believe. And he says, where are your wounds? He says, I received this in the house of my friends. So awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who stands next to me. Strike the shepherd, the sheep will be scattered, and I'll turn my hand against the little ones. We remember that whenever Jesus died, everybody led. They hid themselves. Strike the shepherds, and the sheep will be scattered, and I'll turn my hand against the little ones. In the whole land, 2/3 shall be cut off and perish. 1/3 shall be left alive. I'll put this third into the fire, refine them as one refined silver, test them as gold is tested. They will call upon my name. I will answer them, and they'll say, they are my people. And they will say, the Lord is my God. So here you have the description, very vivid, of the crucifixion. I think verses 9 is emphasizing the idea of the persecution of the first century church, testing them like fire, with fire, testing them with what they had to go through. And he says, you know what? These people, because they came through it, they are my people. And they look at him and said, you are our God. You are our God. And then chapter 14. And this is where some people get a little bit carried away. I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as I can. But some people will talk about the idea that this could be referencing, and again, if you compare Zechariah a lot with Revelation, you see a lot of the same imagery. And a lot of people today will look here in Zechariah chapter 14, talking about the final coming day of the Lord and some things that what's going to happen afterwards. A day's coming when the spoil shall be taken, shall be divided among your midst. I'll gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, the houses plundered, and the women raped. Whoa. So what's God saying? There's going to be another judgment day. And in all the nations shall be against Jerusalem to battle. So again, they're thinking that there's going to be a war before the Lord does come again. All right. Wait a minute. If I was a prophet nowadays, I'd say, wait a minute. Isn't Israel at war right now? And now they're going to make what? He's coming back. Just give us a little bit of time. He's coming. He's coming. He's coming. They've been saying that for 1,000 years, right? And how many people are going to possibly be dissuaded or duped by this? That's why I think it's going to be something that we've got to really spend some time studying and maybe even explaining to the church as we talk about this. He said, the Lord will go out and fight against those nations that he fights on the day of a battle. His feet are standing on the Mount of Olives, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west by a very wide valley. Well, Tommy, what exactly does that mean? Depends on what commentary you're reading at the moment in time. That's seriously the way that's what we've got to look at in that respect. And I don't know that I've reached a definite conclusion exactly what all that means, other than the fact that, if a mountain splits, an earthquake splits something, it suggests the idea all throughout the Old Testament. It suggested the idea of the downfall of a king. And it may very well, all he's talking about is when Jesus comes again, all the nations of the earth, they're not going to be nations no more. Because he's King of Kings, Lord of Lords. And every person at that point in time will be answering to him. And governments will be no more. All the other stuff, all the drama that goes on in the world today, it's not going to be anymore. It's the end of it. That's my take on it. I want to encourage you to look at it yourself and see for yourself. Don't just take my word for it. He says, you shall flee to the valley of my mountains. The valley of the mountains shall reach to Azel. And you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah. And the Lord will come and his holy ones with him. Notice there, the Lord my God shall come, the holy ones with him. Usually in the passage in the Old Testament that emphasizes that, it suggests the angels with him as well. He said, there shall be no light, no cold, no frost. There shall be a unique day, which is known to the Lord. Neither day nor night. But at evening time, there shall be light. Does that mean he's coming at evening? We don't know. We can't say. We're not going to say for sure exactly what that means and what's involved there. But think about the idea that when he comes again, everybody's going to know it on this planet. And the reality is, living water shall flow out from Jerusalem, not the city necessarily, from the heavenly Jerusalem that John talks about in the book of Revelation. living waters, going out to the eastern sea and to the western sea. And they shall continue in summer as in winter. And the Lord will be king over all the earth. On that day, the Lord will be one and his name one. The whole land shall be turned into a plain from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem, but Jerusalem shall remain aloft on its site from the gate of Benjamin to the place of the former gate. And it shall be inhabited, for there shall never be again a decree of utter destruction. Jerusalem shall dwell in security. Again, go back to Revelation. He talks about the holy Jerusalem, the Jerusalem on high. He's talking about heaven here in all of this. And he says, there should be a plague with which the Lord will strike all the people that wage war against this Jerusalem. Think about in the first century, that as they began to preach the gospel and teach it, there was a lot of people that hated them for it, and they did their best to destroy Christianity. But all they did whenever they killed the martyrs was made more people willing to be martyrs, because they were willing to die for Christ. And a great panic shall fall on them, and they shall seize the hand of another, and the hand of the one shall be raised against the hand of the other. Judah shall fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the surrounding nations shall be collected, gold, silver, garments. Plague shall fall on the horses, mules, camels, donkeys, whatever beast shall be in those camps. Then everyone who survives of all the nations that have come against Jerusalem shall go up year to year to worship the King, to keep the Feast of Booths. And if any of the families of the earth do not go up to Jerusalem to worship the Lord, of course, there will be no rain on them. If the family of Egypt does not go up and present themselves, then on there will be no rain. The plague which the Lord afflicts the nations that do not go keep the Feast of Booths. And he says, that shall be the punishment to Egypt and the punishment to all the nations that do not go up. And on that day, on the bells of the horses, holy to the Lord, pots in the house of the Lord shall be as bowls before the altar. Every pot shall be holy to the Lord. So all who sacrifice may come and take of them and boil the meat of the sacrifice in them. And there shall no longer be a traitor in the house of the Lord of hosts on that day. They're not going to be selling animals to pay for sins of the people. When he comes again, all that's going to be done away with. Somebody might say, well, Tommy, what are after looking and reading at all of this, what are your conclusions about it all? I am concluded that the Bible's true. I'm concluding that we don't know all the details. And no matter how hard we might try to make stuff fit, we cannot be guilty of making assumptions about things where the Bible isn't clear on. And I think that's the best way to look at this whole thing. And I think that's the best way to look at the book of Revelation and any of the other prophetic books that talk about the end of time. So I am, there's Zechariah. Any other comments? Anybody got anything else to say? I did get it in 2 weeks, barely. Y'all have been patient with me, and I do appreciate that so very, very, very much. You've meant a lot to me, and you have encouraged me. So we go from there. Next week will be Happy Thanksgiving, and please don't eat too much turkey or ham or whatever. And I'll try not to too, but you know how that goes sometimes. Week after that, we will cover, God willing, Haggai and Malachi, and class will be over. I'm going to miss you guys. But we did, like I said, we will be out for December. January, the first week in January, we're going to start back again on Tuesday and Thursday nights. Be looking for the registration. And if you need something to graduate, let me know that too, because I want to do what I can to make sure that happens for those people that are trying to get the diploma. That's about all I've got.
Tommy, I do have one question.
Okay, brother.
The first is on a Monday. So are they going to start classes not that week, the following week? They're not going to start the week of the first, right? Because first is on Monday.
I'm not sure. I suggested the idea that it would start the first week, but you may be having a good idea. I'll talk with Chuck. You talk with Chuck, suggest what you suggest, and if we
Okay.
want to skip a week, that's fine.
Yeah, I didn't know if we were going to try to start on, because I know like Avondale, they start on Monday. And so if they try to start, I mean, you're talking about starting New Year's night if we do that. So I don't know. I didn't know if we was going to try to start that week or not. So
I don't know yet. I think, like I said, I just sent who's going to be instructed and what classes are going to be there. I assumed certain dates would be the certain start dates. But I have not heard that. I've not heard that finalized. So
Okay.
we do need to talk to Chuck, and hopefully when we get closer to the date, more information will be coming out when it starts, all that other stuff, and we'll go at it that way. I'm not
Okay.
the one that's supposed to make the decisions all the time
Right.
when it starts and
Right.
all.
Yeah.
But if you go back and look at the catalog, there are some provisions in the catalog when they're supposed to start.
Right.
So it may be the second month or second Sunday or second week of the
Second
month.
week. Yeah. Okay. I'll text Chuck tomorrow and see if he's got an idea. So yeah.
All right. All right. I appreciate all of you so very, very much again. And have a great Thanksgiving. All righty.
You too,
Thanks,
man.
Appreciate it.
And
Thanks,
hopefully before after next week, after we eat through the Thanksgiving and all, hopefully we'll have an answer on that other question. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks,
You
brother.
need to give me a call. You got my phone number. You got my email address.
Yeah.
Thank you. You have been a great class. I've enjoyed this. I'm glad I had the chance to teach this again. Thank you.
Yeah.
You too.
All right. Feel better.